Okay, here we go. So we can, here we go. All right. And you You're going to have to learn to become the Christians that you become if you have become a Christian already. It's important for us to know the score. It's important for us to know the real score. Coach Wooden, who was named the top coach of the 20th century by Sports Illustrated, by ESPN, and by Sporting News, the top coach of any sport at any level of the 20th century. His teams have legendary status at UCLA. UCLA basketball, the winner of 10 national championships in 12 years, 7 of them in a row, 88-game winning streak. I mean, just endless accolades. He was called the Wizard of Westwood. But you know, he was more than a basketball coach. He was even a better person. As accomplished as he was very low to the ground because he knew the real score. He knew who he was before God. It's important and vital for you to know how God evaluates and how God scores things. True victory is you doing your best with what you've been given. Who of us is doing what we could and what we should do with what God has given us, according to the abilities he's given us, and according to his calling and his plan for us?
The whole time.
Guys, Michael put that together. Michael Chan, the freshman, leading our media team. Thank you so much. Reactions, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. That was a wonderful, wonderful recap there. And not to mention, Coach Wooden is dear and near to our family. If you've ever been to our home, we've got a lot of Coach Wooden stuff. Actually, that's. I don't even know if Lydia. I wish Lydia was still here. That's when he was in Purdue as a kid. So I've got a lot of Coach Wooden memorabilia. Partly because you've got somebody who's authentic. He knew the real score. And one of the themes last week that we spoke on was knowing the real score. And it's important to know the real score because a lot of us are making up our own scores and we're making up our own criteria. And we're doing the thing where, you know, we go to God and we get in there and we, you know, he's saying, well, why should I let you in here? And we're going, well, because I made it. I scored enough. And he says who? So it says me. I said, what? He might be saying, what criteria are you using? Well, you know, the one that I came up with. And it's, you know, that's kind of silly, but it's what we do all the time. And I really would hate for you to get up to the door and then knock and say, hey, I'm here, guys, ready to come in. And they're saying, who are you? I'm me, you know, time to come in. Huh? That would be like this. That'd be like going up to an airline ticket counter at the airport where you've been at home and you've printed your own ticket. And you say, hey, I want to get over to New York City. New York City. And so I go ahead and I say, oh, what airlines do I want to choose? I know, I'll choose American Airlines. Yeah, I'll choose American Airlines. So I go ahead and I print out and I type out and I print out my own ticket to the American Airlines ticket to New York City. And then I go ahead and I go to the American Airlines counter and we're all lining up to go in. And then they ask for tickets, please. And then I say, here. And then they say, hold on, buddy. What is this? I said, that's my ticket to New York City. They said, this isn't a ticket. I said, yeah, it is. Doesn't it say this flight number? Doesn't it say American Airlines? Doesn't it say my name on there? Doesn't it say New York City? Everything's on there. Let me in. And they're going to say, I'm sorry, that's not a ticket that we issued. You're not allowed to issue your own tickets. Friends, we can sing and dance all we want. Hey, I know the American Airlines jingle. I've watched all your commercials. I know the American Airlines slogan. In fact, I have an American Airlines pen right here. Don't you see it? That's not going to get me in. We've got to know the real score, the real measurement stick, and we got to know the criteria to be able to enter into God's home. And so our own scoring isn't going to be enough. And so last week we shared about the way God evaluates things, and we implored you, and I encourage you to try to follow him. Try to see if you can listen to him and listen to the way he says you can get in, the way he says you can come to him. And so Lydia did such a great job. I'm going to actually run through some of the things and just maybe skip over a few things and get to some things to set us up for our small group time today. But I want to remind you of a couple of things. And Eileen has the handout in the chat, I believe. So go ahead and feel free to download that so you can follow. But one of the things we talked about last week also is the fact that we're not owners. We are stewards. We're trustees. We're people who take care of God's stuff, but we don't own any of it. That's all his. And so how are we taking care of his stuff? But when we get his stuff, what often we end up finding is that we suffer from performance anxiety. Many of us, even the seemingly confident ones, and especially the high achieving ones, we suffer from performance anxiety, which is a result of insecurity. And I'm not bashing you for being insecure. I'm insecure. But so are you. Everyone in my family is insecure. Everyone in your family is insecure. And so what do we do with our insecurity? We try to securely hold on to the fact that we're better than you, or we prove ourselves. We're trying to develop an established reputation for ourselves so we can feel better than someone else. And so we start comparing, and we start engaging in religion and religious ways to try to live well enough, to try to perform well enough. And Lydia talked about that. But let me just say this. Trying to perform well enough according to our own criteria is really a cheap and an easy shortcut way at trying to accomplish something. It's a shortcut. It's a shortcut of a way to try to measure spirituality. And I need you to listen, because you do it. We do it. And God doesn't want us to do it. Because when we take the shortcuts and when we use performance as an external measurement towards how we are doing spiritually, what it does is it reduces the true and the deep and the rich and the thoughtful and the mysterious and the God-dependent relational life. We were created for relationship. And when we do that, we exchange that with do's and don'ts. Makes it a lot easier, isn't it? We do it or we don't do it. And we exchange it with man-made measurements and standards and rituals and routines that we start measuring ourselves by. Identifiable vernacular and verbiage that we use, that if we use this phrasing, we're more spiritual than if we didn't use it. Even leaders, we get into this, especially leaders, I should say, get in. You've heard leaders use spiritual language and you don't even know if they really mean what they're meaning, because we're so used to just saying it because it sounds spiritual. And if we check off that box, we're spiritual, but that's not real spirituality. And we learn how to do that. And one thing I really hate for you to do is to learn spiritual verbiage in TD and then be graduating from TD, and then you get unleashed with all this spiritual verbiage and do's and don'ts upon the world. And that's what Lydia was saying. She had to kind of work through and break down. And we don't want to send you off out of TD with that or like that. Where positions and titles mean things, where your good works are a form of measurement rather than a form of good. There's a difference. We're living by our own sight and our own determination and our own willpower and our own human wisdom. And we subject ourselves to elitism. Elitism. We rely on our personal disciplines and waking up in the morning and doing our devotions long enough. And I'm not saying that any of that inherently is wrong, but it's not inherently good either. It's neither. It depends on the attitude we take when we do them, or even when we come to TD. And so I want to, work through that a little bit, because when we live by faith instead of by sight, and we focus on being faithful to him, the results come. It just comes. When we plug into God, his power comes through and we light up. We become who we were supposed to be, who we've become. And so let's, in fact, I think I want to do this. Let's head outside. So, no, come this way, come this way, come this way. Follow me outside. Okay, Joyce, come close, come close, come close. All right, when we live by faith, the good performance, the good works, the natural outworking of faithfulness will result. It's just what happens. You don't even have to think about it. Have you ever seen anybody who's so good at what they do, this way, that they do it, and it's just like poetry. It's like ballet. It's just so smooth. They don't even have to think about it. You can tell. It's just a natural result. And that's kind of the way it is. You can always tell who's working real hard in the church, but to kind of, working too hard. And I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying that we tend to do that. But when we just plug ourselves in the Lord, it just flows. It just starts to come. The strength happens, the talent happens, the work happens, the habits happen, and the fruit happens. And so when we live by sight, good performance becomes a demigod. It becomes a monster that has us in its clutches. It becomes this thing that is over us, and it leads us to myopia and to freneticism and to insecurity, and we miss the big picture. And so I want to take our reading of the Bible as a measurement of this, or as a way.
Joy.
It's okay. You can say something too, Joy. A lot of times when we read the Bible, we read it with this posture. I'm going to read the Bible, and I want to know how I can apply the Bible to my life. And any of you who have known me for a while know that I can't stand that. That's just the opposite way. That's the opposite of intention, the opposite intention of what God had in mind. The Bible isn't to be read to see how we can apply it to our lives. The Bible is to be read to see how we can apply our lives to the Bible. Our lives aren't central. God is central. And then the Bible is given to us to see how we can adjust our lives and apply it to him, to his plan, to his will. And so when we come to the Bible, what we often come to is we see God like Santa God. And we see the Bible oftentimes like Amazon, where we have this whole list of things that we can pick and choose from on this huge site. And there seems to be an endless number of things. And so we go where we want to go, and then we find the things we want to find in the spiritual life. And then we go and say, hey, Lord, this is what I'd like. And then we take we treat it like fruit, and we say, Lord, I like one of these. Could you give me a little bit of power? Here, I need some power. And then you say, yeah, along with this fruit of power, how about this? Along with that, I'd love some joy too. And maybe you can give me some joy, or we use it like plucking fruit, or he'll send it down. And then, but I need to have peace too. And so give me some peace. And then we end up having, these things, and they become what we think are the fruit of the Spirit. Where in your handouts, you see the fruit of the Spirit, according to Galatians 5:22 and 23, is love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and gentleness and self-control. Against such things there is no law. And we say, Lord, I want that. I want some of that. Could you give me some love and some joy and some peace? Could you give that to me? And
We also, ask God for strength and some wisdom and some power. And, I ask you this. Even if God went ahead and gave it to you, God sends down all that stuff you've asked for from heaven and he gives it to you. Can I ask you something? What good does that do? What good does that do in your hands? So now I got in my hands the things I've asked for, but it's still me controlling it. It's still me using it. And we all know about me, don't we? That would be like giving a kid who wants some power, giving him a gun. You gave him power, but what's he going to do with it? Giving a 3-year-old a gun? That's kind of like us. If God gives us what he wants, what are we going to do with it? And so one of the principles I want you to remember is this. We can come inside because I think Angela's getting bitten by mosquitoes. But one of the principles I want you to know is this. God isn't up there. Keep coming. God isn't up there in heaven giving us stuff down here on earth so that we can live for him up there in heaven. That's not what he does. That's what we want, but that's not what he does. We want God, to give us the fruit as if it's outside of us. But he doesn't want fruit outside of us. He wants to live in us. In us and through us so he can produce within. And in producing within, it comes out of us. It's not something that we're asking for out there and for him to send it down. God doesn't want us down here living for him up there. He wants to come down here to live in us down here so that we can live for him right where we're at. So dedication or death, that's where we are right now. Dedication or death. And I want to give an illustration of what I just said, because some of the saddest events in life are found in the lives of people who have dedicated themselves to doing God's will. Yeah, you heard me right. Some of the saddest events in life happen when we see the lives of people who have dedicated themselves to doing God's will. And so let me give you one big example here, just as an example. You guys all remember Abraham and Sarah, right? Genesis. And we know that Abraham was an old man, 75 years old, and Sarah was 65 years old. We know that God had told Abraham when he was 75, I'm going to give you a great reward. And then Abraham, who was one of the wealthiest men in antiquity, Abraham says to God effectively, what else do I need? I have everything I want for now and everything I need forever, pretty much. And even what I do have now, I'm going to give it to my servant, Eliezer of Damascus. I don't have any children. I don't have anyone to pass it to. So I've got all this wealth and I've got all the blessing that you've given me, and it's all going to go to my servant. What are you going to give me now? I mean, I don't really need anything. Do you remember that conversation that Abraham had with God? He wasn't too excited about God's promise of a great reward. But God told Abraham, look up at the stars. Look up at the stars. He brought him into the desert. And he said, go ahead, look at the stars and count them if you can. And Abraham looked up, and in the Palestinian sky, I understand that the stars are explosions, that it's just so bright. And he says, you know what? Your descendants are going to be like that. Count them if you can. That's how many descendants you're going to have. And we all know his story because he's saying like, I don't have any children. I'm childless. Sarah and I have tried for many, many years, and we're childless. Am I hearing this right? Don't play a joke on me, God. Don't. That's really cruel. because you know how much Sarah and I have been yearning and trying for children. If any of you have ever known any couple, and maybe it's even within your own family, but if you've ever known any couple that really wanted children but are unable to conceive of children, it's a heartbreaking thing. It's extremely painful, extremely discouraging. And it starts getting into your head, into your psyche, into your self-worth. Someone feels very guilty in the marriage, and it's very challenging on marriages because usually it's one side or the other. It's either the female who can't bear or the male who can't give something that will bear children. And so couples oftentimes will exhaust every last ounce of resource, every last financial dollar they have for the hopes and effort to try to have children. And then nowadays they have something called in vitro fertilization, and that process is like $30,000 to $40,000, where they're planting in the sperm and the egg, and they're trying to make it a reality. It's a struggle. It's a painful thing, and it's common. How do we deal with it? What I've done is I've asked Robert and Kathy if they wouldn't mind, and I just basically asked them because Robert and Kathy have been in a process right now. Their precious daughter, our beloved, and that she's the world to them. But she's not the only one that they wanted. And so I've asked Robert and Kathy if they wouldn't mind coming in and just telling us a little bit, just so we can have an experiential feel for what Abraham and Sarah and other people that you may know of, or don't even know of yet, but will come to know. Or it might even be you 10 years down the road. What it might feel like and what they've had to do to work through their feelings and disappointment. So Robert and Kathy, we haven't rehearsed this, and I haven't asked you anything in terms of questions or fed you any questions. I just told you, would you be willing to converse on this topic? So thank you for doing that and for being vulnerable and for being personal. It really lets us in to be part of your lives. And as a TD family, we call ourselves a family. And so this is kind of a risky venture for you, but thank you for doing it. I'm just going to go ahead, and you've heard what I've shared so far. I'm going to let you take it from here for a few minutes, and just, if you don't mind, just take the baton and share.
Thanks.
Thanks, Arthur. Yeah, so as you guys know, Hannah, she's 5 now, and when she was 2, that's when we started trying for a second. We both love children, and always imagined having maybe 3 or 4 little kids. Robert said he liked 2 or 3, but definitely more than 1. So it's been 3 years since we tried, and Arthur has shared a little bit about how hard and painful it is, and it really is true. I feel like it's very hard whenever you're praying really hard for something, and it could be something not bad. Children are a gift from the Lord, and it's not bad to want more children. You're praying so hard, and you feel like it's happening for everyone around you except you, that it could get that's when it gets very hard. You have to deal with uh, confusing thoughts, why isn't this happening? We had Hannah. But the second infertility thing, it's real too. And then there's also dealing with kind of like our perceived idea of what other people can view us, like those pressures, we'll get comments. Well, for me, I got comments about oh, don't you want more children? 加油, don't be so stressed at home. And other comments Hannah's getting kind of lonely, hint, hint, hint. And these are well-intentioned people. That it makes me think oh, there must be something we're doing wrong. Or, if it's so easy for everyone else, how come it's not happening for us? And so there's outside pressures on what I think people view us and even like our relationship. But also there's like also wondering, God, maybe, and Arthur talked about, it becomes like a identity worth thing. It's like we had thoughts like, maybe I'm not fit to have more children. Maybe God knows that I'm like not capable to raise more kids. And that's why, and then it becomes about my abilities and, getting really low and down about that. So, but definitely I could relate a lot better with some of the people in the Bible, and I read my Bible, to relate with Abraham and Sarah and how they yearned for that child and all the different ways they tried to have a child, like, not God's way, but their own idea of wisdom. And also, I didn't know this, but Isaac and Rebecca also, they waited 20 years before they had their first children. And Rachel and Jacob, she was barren. She had Joseph and Benjamin, but that took years. There was a lot of heartache and drama in that big family. But, and the other people, Hannah in the Bible, Elizabeth. So come to really relate to like just the, desire for more, but it's unfulfilled and you don't know why. And it's hard, like it's painful also to like, look at other people and they didn't expect it or they weren't trying, and it seemed so easy.
Yeah. I think that's just the heart of it, where there's even like a good desire and a desire to think that, well, children are a blessing from the Lord, and we want to we want to raise them to give them the best opportunity, right, to be able to experience who God is, to know Him, that God would change their hearts to love Him. And that's part of the legacy, I think, of Abraham, of how like he answered God's call, like Arthur said, to go out of the land of Ur, and God was going to give him a land. But what good is right? What good is the promised land without someone you love to carry that on and to enjoy that afterwards and to carry on the legacy? And so I think for guys, for me, that is one of the struggles, to think my wife and we both have this desire to and feel like we have more love in our family to give, but especially Kathy, who's feeling so strongly to know that I love her, that we want to follow the Lord, and yet there's nothing that I can do here. There, as much as I can try, I can't solve this issue for her or for our family, and we have to come here with open hands before God. And I think one way that's been helpful to deal with that is that every time people ask, I think that's something that I and I think Kathy tries as well, to just be open with, and to let them know, hey, if they're like, our desire is there, we've been praying, but this up and down journey, each month realizing, hey, we're now pregnant, has been bringing us together, has been helping us to rely more on God and more thankful for like what He's given us so far. Just saying that God help us to be faithful until unless there's more.
Robert and Kathy, thank you so much for sharing that. And TD, I pray and I hope that, as part of the TD family, you would be upholding them as to what God might have in store. There's a lot of options to consider for families in the position that Robert and Kathy are in. They're
You know, do we go IVF? Do we do this? Another time we can talk about another option that they are actually pursuing right now. There are a lot of different things to consider and to work through as to how far are we going to go and how far do we push it, and then how far or when do we say, okay, well, God, you know, that's it, that's all I'm going to do. And so there's a wide range, and I don't think there's a one right answer for every family. I think there's room for and space for a range, but every family has to go through that. And I want you to learn how to have a heart, learn how to have empathy for all those around you. These are, you know, Robert and Kathy are people that we know and love for years, right? And to get to know people at the level that they're at. But when you read the Bible also, would you also consider reading the Bible and looking at the lives of the people in the Bible, not at arm's length in a distant, you know, kind of bookish way, but also get into their lives and see what they might be feeling? If you do, that's how you're going to really see the Bible alive in your imagination and in your thoughts, because then you're going to start seeing that they are real people. And so when we look at Abraham and Sarah, what you're looking at is a couple now who have been waiting and waiting and waiting, and nothing's happened. And 10 years go by, and many conversations have passed. Are you sure God told you this, honey? Yes, I'm sure. What do you think? I made this all up? How many times I got to tell you? I know exactly what God said to me. Well, I know we told people. I know how embarrassing it is. I mean, is it my fault? I mean, that's what God told me, all right? Yeah, I know I'm 85 and I know how stupid it looks too. You don't have to remind me of that. Can you imagine what their conversations might have felt like as year after year goes by and it's not happening? And then Genesis 16 records an excerpt of their convo. And it records what they decided to do to ensure that God's promise would come true. And so they decided that Abraham would father a child through their maidservant Hagar. Now, you know, you got to know that this was not a foreign practice back then. People did that. They used their servants to bear children for them when they couldn't have it. And so that happened back then, and it still happens today. I know of someone personally who actually carried a baby for another couple who couldn't conceive. And when the baby came out, that was theirs because it was using his sperm. I mean, I'm not saying, you know, that's a moral dilemma to talk about maybe one day, but I'm just saying it happens and it happened. But I want to say that in their case, that was never what God had planned. In the case of Abraham and Sarah, that was not what God had planned. Because it would take the miracle out of it, wouldn't it? I mean, anybody could do that. You impregnate your maidservant and have a child. I mean, anybody could do that, and people did. And so did Hagar. Hagar conceived, and she gave birth to a baby boy, and they named him Ishmael. Now, you got to know that this wasn't the situation of Abraham and Sarah planning to have a child at all costs, no matter what. That wasn't it. I mean, they had given up all hope of having a child. They were already resolved, well, this is not God's will for us. Abraham accepted the disappointment of not having an heir to carry on his family name. And you know, in the Chinese culture, how important that is. You know, how much the Chinese people want boys to carry on the name. And he just reconciled, God, I guess that's not your will. He had a servant that was going to receive his immense wealth. You gave me all this wealth and it all goes to my servant. Okay, if that's what you want. It wasn't them really pushing the envelope. It was God who came to them with the idea of a child. It wasn't Abraham's idea. And so what I want you to see is that Ishmael was not conceived in an act of rebellion against God. Ishmael wasn't conceived in an act of rebellion against God. Ishmael was conceived in an attitude of agreement with God. It wasn't out of disobedience to God. It was actually out of a strong dedication to God's plan and purpose. Did you catch that? They were concurring with God. They were dedicated to God's plan. And they had Ishmael. And God didn't recognize Ishmael. It was another 14 years later, 14 years, that Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac. When Ishmael was 14, that's 25 years after they had been given the promise. I mean, most of our TD leaders aren't even 25 yet. I mean, that's a long time, and none of you TDers are. And so when Isaac was a young teen, God tested Abraham's faith. God tested this whole scenario here. And here's what it says in Genesis 22. If you want to turn to it, it might be very valuable because there's an application for us. Genesis 22. And in Genesis 22, it says this. Please pay attention and follow, because and try to put yourself in their shoes. Sometime later, it says, God tested Abraham, and he said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he replied. Hold on a sec. Eileen, am I on? Because on my screen, I'm not the speaker. I don't have the speaker view. I only have Robert's black screen. And for the recording, this is going to be huge. When Isaac was a young teen, God tested Abraham's faith, right? And he said, here I am. And then God said, take your son and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, verse 3, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. Look at your Bible. Is that what that says? Look at your Bible. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham. Abraham said, here I am. Then God said, take your son and go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. Is that what it says? TD, if that's what it said, if that's what God told Abraham, what do you think Abraham would have done? I'll tell you what he would have done. If God said that to Abraham, Abraham would have dutifully gotten up, he would have gone, and he would have gotten Ishmael, and he would have brought him up to the mountain. But that's not what it says. What does it say? It says, Abraham, take your son, your only son, the son whom you love. And just to make sure there's no ambiguity here, he names him Isaac. Isaac was the child of promise. Ishmael was not. You see, Ishmael was Abraham's work. Isaac was God's work. Ishmael could be explained by Abraham and Sarah's scheming and planning and working. Isaac could only be explained by God's miraculous working at the age of 100. And so what we need to know is that God not only makes the promises, but God is the one who fulfills the promises. Philippians 2:12-13 says, for it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. You see, God's not up there watching you down here, making promises for you down here, wanting you to down here to live for him up there so he can send blessing down here. That's not the way the Christian life works, but that's exactly how we live, isn't it? We live as if Jesus came down and he paid for our sins that we could never pay for, to get us back to the point of zero. And then now we work our tails off and we're moral and we go to church so that we're worthy enough to be called Christians and to make doubly sure that we get to heaven. Now tell me, am I off here? Or is that exactly the way it is? Is that exactly the way we live? And we live out what is known as the orphan spirit, where we act like orphans. And orphans, if you ever met orphans, I've met many of them. They're super nice and super sweet and super, super loving. But one thing they've never had is they've never had parents. And they've never had provision and security. So they are nice and they have to earn their way and they have to perform. And when they get something, they have a hard time letting it go because, it wasn't given to them. They had to kind of earn it, and they have a hard time sharing. They have a hard time thinking any other way because that's all they know. And you don't blame them a bit. And talking with adoptive parents, and if you ever hear adoptive parent stories, it takes time to reconfigure the whole mindset because they're used to earning their way and performing and being, a joy to somebody, and because of the way they act, and they've never felt the security and the acceptance and the love because of the love of the parent, not because of their performance. And I know that many of us on this call tonight know exactly what I'm saying. But God wants to start changing your direction. He wants to start acting as your father, if you'll let him, to give you security, to give you performance, but not for the same reasons you've usually performed. And so what we need to know is that God wasn't just active on the cross so that we could look back and be grateful for what Jesus has done in the past. But what he did on the cross was also that he could be active in our lives in the present. 1 Thessalonians 5:24 says that the one who calls you to do stuff, the one who calls you is faithful, and he will do it. He will do it. He doesn't call us to a task for us to do for him, but he calls us so that he might come in us and dwell in us and be the means through which he does it together. This is so important for you to know. It's so important for you to believe. And it's so scary because it will mean leaving the paradigm with which you've built all your success. And a lot of you have had maybe 11, 12 years of success this way, and you kind of like where you are. And it's scary to let it go, but your ceiling is so low. And it will result in paranoia and dissatisfaction. Right now, it's maybe quasi-working, but even inside, you're hurting. And you're wondering, isn't there more? But you're scared because at least you're succeeding, at least compared to other people this way. But remember what the real score is. He wants to do life together. You see, Christ for real isn't the Christ of religion. It's the Christ of relationship. And I want to introduce some of you for the first time to have an actual relationship, not in accepting an ABC of the Christian faith, not in saying a prayer and doing that and continuing to work your way to prove that you're worthy to be, to the prayer that you made, but actually to have an unconditional love and an acceptance and a permanent relationship that will, in actual fact, allow you to perform, but freely, without worry, and allow you to be at your best. We can take matters into our own hands, no matter how sincere we are for the Lord. A lot of the work we've done for the Lord is our work, a la Abraham. And it can go awry when we've done too much. And I know firsthand from my own experience, I've done that. I know. And I've botched it up. And the Bible gives you plenty of examples of this. Moses is another example I wish we could go over. But we always end up exercising that orphan spirit to validate and to prove ourselves. which really then nullifies what he did on the cross, right? As if it really wasn't enough. It just needs our little extra, huh? It was a head start that he gave us, and we're thankful for that head start. But now it's us who have to carry it out and finish it. God says no. Romans says, for from him and through him and to him are all things. Did you get the through him? Not through us, not from him, through us, to him. From him, through him, in us. Because greater is he who is in the world than greater is he who is in you, than he who is in the world. I was wondering, what's the rest of it? It's greater is he that is in you than he who is in the world. And so we're going to break up into our small groups now for 15 minutes. And we're going to just have a conversation. Things have run a little bit behind schedule today, so sorry about that. But I think it's all good stuff. But basically, have a conversation about what you've heard. You see it in the handout. Learn how to converse. I'm not even giving you and not giving leaders specific questions to ask you to lead a conversation and just kind of tow you through. That's the stuff that I don't really like. I like real people having real conversation with what God is really telling you actively and being able to talk about it and not fearing like, am I going to be, let's make this a judgment-free, performance-free zone. And let's just talk and get to know one another and how we feel, good, bad, or indifferent, okay? And you can see some of the suggestions in the handout. But Eileen, if you would send us over to small groups, that'd be great. And then give us 15 minutes and then we'll come back in 15 minutes.